Hey, it's me, your boy Blue Gatsuga, and it's been a while since I've last done a Yu-Gi-Oh! Tier analysis video. I kinda held off on doing it for a while, because of Dualtober, and I wanted to wait to see what the last cards in Blazing Vortex were gonna be before I made another Yu-Gi-Oh! Tier analysis video, because as we all know, Draitrons came out in a fairly recent set, not one of the main sets. But usually in sets like the ones Draitrons came out in, they tend to get more support in the newest main set. So I kind of wanted to wait before I did a video on this deck. And as it turns out, Blazing Vortex did not get any new Draitrons support, so I guess we're clear on that one. Anyways, let's get started. First off, we have Draitrons. Draitrons are a light machine archetype, and they're ritual based. And I really like this deck a lot, and it's my favorite out of the three decks that came out in its respective set. Anyways, for the pros, this deck has great monsters overall. Almost all their monsters are pretty good. Even their weaker monsters and more lackluster monsters are still, again, really good. This deck has great spells and traps. Almost all of them are really good. Such a great start to an archetype already. This deck can OTK. This deck has really great search potential, not potential, search power. Because you can consistently get your ritual spell and your ritual monster to your hand. And normally I hate ritual decks that only have one good ritual spell and a bunch of ritual monsters, but Draitrons actually manages to make it work. This deck has good removal options, which is pretty surprising. This deck is incredibly consistent, and this deck can also work with other ritual monsters since the requirement for a ritual summon, all it requires is attack value. And the field spell allows you to circumvent that. The attack value condition isn't placed into the ritual monsters themselves, but into the ritual spell itself. So you can actually splash in a bunch of ritual monsters, but at the same time, that also kind of has me concerned because I really don't want to see this deck get hit if people start splashing in broken ritual monsters. And this deck may or may not, in the future, might be responsible for an actual banned ritual monster, which I checked and it turns out there are no banned ritual monsters. But it might change in the future, who knows. And for the cons, L gamma is the deck's main form of recovery, meaning if gamma is stopped, you kind of just flop, really. But because you can argue that being super heavily reliant on gamma is a weakness, but because this deck is ridiculously consistent with how fast you can actually get to gamma, it's hard to call the reliance on gamma a weakness unless someone called by the graves it, and even then you have one other monster that can get your bandaged gamma back, as well as the fact that called by the grave is limited unless you're doing a mirror match and your opponent uses that one designator card to banish their gamma, but I can't really imagine that happening a lot. Going first is not really the best because you can, I think the best first turn thing I can actually think of while playing pure Draitrons. Of course, with the other ritual monsters, this going first might not be too much of an issue. But the best going first play I can actually think of is having the counter trap and your other Draitron ritual monster that isn't Meteornus. Can't read. And this deck can't play through more than 2 to 3 negates. Which is to be expected. Anyways, I would say that this deck is a tier 2.5 deck as it is right now. I think it has a lot of potential to be meta and a lot of potential to actually do really great in the game, but we're gonna have to see how the current metas unfold. Next, we have Raidraptors. Raidraptors are an Arc 5 archetype, and Raidraptors are an Xyz Dark Wing Beast archetype with a lot of crazy cards in it, but somehow this deck isn't meta. Anyways, let's get started. For the pros, Master Rule 5, obviously. You can just spam Xyz monsters onto the board as much as you want, especially with this deck. This deck has great boss monsters. Almost all their boss monsters pack really great effects. This deck has good spells and traps. I can't really think of that many bad Raidraptor spells or traps in the deck. This deck has great search power because there's a lot of searchers in this deck. And especially with cards like Y-Strix, I think if you resolve Y-Strix, you pretty much win. This deck is also really versatile because all of your extract monsters have different effects and they're very great depending on situations. Plus, you can also play a build of Raidraptors that revolves around you summoning Infinity as well as other things. So the deck can actually do a lot of things. And this deck is fairly consistent, but that is to be expected when you have so many searchers. And I think Yubel Mastery or Stanji used to call this deck the search deck because before all they did was just search. Anyways, and for the cons, they need to go first most of the time, and they can't play through too many negates. That's obvious. Also, I forgot to mention their boss monsters being Final Fortress Falcon and Ultimate Falcon. Those monsters are very big and very hard to get around. And they are fairly easy to summon in Raidraptors, especially with the new support they got in Phantom Rage. I think that they're a solid rogue deck and may or may not be able to wreak havoc on the meta. Anyways, that's why I'd say it's a tier 2 deck and not a tier 1 deck, or 1.5. It has potential, but it's not really there yet. Anyways, tell me what you guys think about Draitrons and Raidraptors in the comments. It's me, your boy Blue Gatsuga, and I'm out.